6. The casualties, prosecutions, and police actions, targeting communists. Police focused on Communist Party members, using minor infractions and pre-strike materials as grounds for arrest. Examples: Rhondda Valley. Members arrested for possessing old communist literature. Sentences included up to 2 months imprisonment. Shipley. 8 individuals detained at a communist dance, accused of inciting troops despite no military presence nearby. South Wales. Raids led to arrests and sentences for mere possession of pre-strike publications. Charges often lacked substantive evidence but aimed to disrupt communist activities. Arrests of workers. Approximately 1,000 workers were prosecuted across England and Scotland, with common charges including impeding traffic and acts of intimidation. Examples: Glasgow, over 200 arrests, with average sentences of 3 months. Gateshead, 50 miners sentenced to 1 month for intimidation. Doncaster, 84 miners received 3 months for disrupting transport. Gloucester, 13 dockers sentenced for stopping a barge and tug. Class-conscious magistrates. Bias against strikers. Magistrates displayed overt bias, targeting workers while favoring volunteers and strikebreakers. Example: Marylebone. A railway worker was chastised for participating in the strike and ordered to pay £8 in arrears or face imprisonment. Strikebreakers received leniency. Charges against volunteers and special constables, such as speeding violations, were dismissed. Police and picketing. Crackdown on collective action. Police were highly organized, armed, and ready to suppress picketing and other worker actions. Workers faced difficulties due to a lack of preparation and coordinated strategies. Any attempts at collective resistance were met with force under the guise of protecting property. Government strategy. Picketing was restricted to basic trade unionism. Broader collective action was suppressed. The General Council's appeals for pacifism left workers vulnerable to police and employer tactics. Workers' resilience. Learning from experience. Despite the repression, workers began to recognize the need for better organization and preparedness. Class war prisoners' aid. Petty prosecutions spurred the growth of the International Class War Prisoners' Aid, reflecting a collective response to systemic injustices. 7. Reflections and Perspectives. Overview of the General Strike. The General Strike was initiated by leaders who opposed it, conducted reluctantly by those same leaders, and ultimately surrendered by them, leading to tragic consequences for the millions of workers involved. Despite the tragic nature of events, it marks a critical moment for re-evaluating class struggles and political dynamics in Britain. Historical context. The strike is framed as part of an ongoing evolution of class consciousness and the intensification of class warfare in Britain. The capitalist class solidified its grip on political power, while the working class witnessed a political awakening, crystallizing into movements like the Communist Party. Political outcomes for the capitalist class. The Conservative Party and capitalist forces claimed a political victory, although the economic benefits were not immediately realized. The government used the strike to test and strengthen its machinery of control, including the military, police, and auxiliary organizations like the OMS and Special Constabulary. The capitalist class gained practical experience in subduing working-class movements, reinforcing their dominance over the state apparatus. Impact on opposition parties. The Liberal Party fractured further, with most members supporting the government's actions during the strike, rendering the party ineffective as an opposition force. The Labour Party leadership, having collaborated with the government during its tenure, failed to offer genuine resistance. The difference between Labour and Conservative leaders lies only in their constituencies, not in their fundamental policies. Labour Party weaknesses. The Labour Party leaders, such as MacDonald and Thomas, demonstrated loyalty to constitutional principles over class interests, leading to ineffective opposition. Examples cited include Labour's previous use of emergency powers against strikers in 1924 and their reluctance to challenge the government's handling of domestic and foreign issues during the strike. Broader implications. The strike showcased the consolidation of state power by the capitalist class, reducing the role of alternative forces like fascists, who aimed to challenge the state apparatus. It exposed the failures of reformist and moderate opposition, underscoring the need for more radical, class-conscious strategies for the working class. Continuation of Emergency Powers Act. After the general strike, the government extended the Emergency Powers Act with minimal opposition in Parliament. Only about 60 Labour MPs opposed the extension, while many Labour leaders abstained, effectively increasing the government's majority. This lack of opposition highlights the weakness of Labour leadership in Parliament. Trade union weakness. The general strike centralized power within the General Council of the unions, but this power was quickly abandoned after May 12. Trade union executives, fearful of collective action, pledged against future acts of labor solidarity. The government effectively reduced trade union opposition outside Parliament to the same ineffectual level as parliamentary opposition. Conservative Party strategy and strength. Prime Minister Baldwin orchestrated events, e.g., the 1923 election and 1926 general strike, to demoralize both the Labour Party and trade unions. The Conservative Party emerged politically stronger, with no serious organized opposition inside or outside Parliament. Capitalist forces consolidated their dominance, especially over the state apparatus. Economic impacts of the general strike. The general strike weakened the economic foundations of the bourgeoisie, intensifying the ongoing economic crisis. Industry slowed, municipal charges increased, and national finances worsened, contrasting with the strengthened political power of the Conservative Party. Despite economic damage, the general strike deepened the political consciousness of workers. Labor movement's morale. Workers maintained solidarity and morale despite the strike's confusing leadership and governmental suppression. Labour's victory in the Hammersmith by-election following the strike indicates workers were not swayed toward conservatism. Rise of class consciousness. The general strike galvanized class awareness among workers, pushing them further away from conservatism and toward political activism. The strike exposed the limits of the current political and trade union leadership but strengthened grassroots worker consciousness. Domination of finance capital. The government, dominated by bankers and financiers, prioritized policies beneficial to the financial elite, tax cuts for the wealthy. Returning to the gold standard, which increased the value of financial investments. Exporting capital under plans like the Dawes Plan, which disadvantaged heavy industries. Internal divisions within the capitalist class, such as the Federation of British Industries' objections to government policies, hint at potential future rifts. Anticipated government policies. Conservatives aim to cement their dominance by strengthening the House of Lords to block socialist legislation, revising the electoral system to disadvantage labor, potentially introducing proportional representation and alternative voting, tightening franchise regulations, potentially excluding workers reliant on poor law relief. These measures target labor's rising influence in industrial areas while solidifying conservative control in rural regions. Repression of trade unions. The government plans to legislate against revolutionary propaganda and limit trade union activities, encouraging unions to restrict disputes to their individual sectors, advocating a return to craft unionism as supported by leaders like MacDonald, building on the Judge Astbury ruling that deemed the general strike illegal. Challenges for conservatives. While the conservatives successfully suppressed liberal and labor leadership, they faced the challenge of curbing the rising class consciousness among workers. The general strike represents a significant step in the workers' awakening, ensuring the struggle between classes is far from over. Lack of preparation for the general strike. The General Council of the labor movement, dominated by right-wing leaders like Mr. Thomas, failed to organize effectively for the general strike. Despite earlier affirmations of solidarity with miners, leaders actively spoke against strike actions, favoring wage reductions or adjustments. The strike was reluctantly called on May 1, 1926, by opponents of the idea. Operational failures during the strike. Limited scope. Only certain unions and sections of unions were called out, creating confusion and limiting the strike's effectiveness. Collaboration with the government. Food supply operations were handed over to the government, with cooperatives becoming allies of the state instead of the unions. Disorganized leadership. Orders were issued through individual union executives rather than directly from the General Council, leading to fragmented efforts. Absence of parliamentary action. The Labour Party in Parliament closed operations, failing to obstruct the government as it had during similar crises in 1925. Political failures of the Labour and ILP leadership. Labour and ILP leaders, including MacDonald and Thomas, abdicated political responsibility, treating the strike as an industrial dispute devoid of political implications. The leadership refused to acknowledge the political nature of the general strike, instead redirecting the movement toward pacifism, formal parliamentarism, and craft unionism. This betrayal of political responsibility resulted in confusion, the strike's limited scope, and eventual failure. Role of the Communist Party. The Communist Party was the only political entity within the working class movement that maintained its political work during the strike. Despite police interference, the Communist Party supported strike committees and continued to educate workers about the political dimensions of their struggle. Bankruptcy of labor and trade union leadership. Labour Party and ILP leaders' denial of the political significance of the strike exposed their hypocrisy and political bankruptcy. By treating politics as separate from industrial action, they undermined the strike's potential and revealed their inability to lead class struggle effectively. The political nature of the general strike. The general strike, involving millions of workers and shutting down major industries, was inherently political as it altered class relations. Denying its political nature was tantamount to weakening the workers' cause and aiding the government's efforts. Missed opportunities and leadership hypocrisy. Labor leaders failed to confront the political challenge posed by the strike, preferring the ballot box as the sole venue for political issues, despite the immediate class conflict. Leaders did not oppose the strike at its inception, yet later disassociated themselves from its political implications, highlighting their duplicity. Inevitability of political action. Strikes and industrial actions inherently challenge the existing power dynamics between classes, making them political acts by nature. Labor leaders' refusal to face the political realities of the strike betrayed their lack of understanding and commitment to workers' struggles. Key premise: class power and the illusions of easy socialism. Illusions in the working class movement. Workers are encouraged to join unions, cooperatives, and the Labour Party without recognizing that every growth in these forces escalates the conflict over class power. The failure to address the political implications of these actions leads to confusion and betrayal, as seen during the general strike. The necessity of political responsibility. All actions of the working class movement are political. Leadership must accept and act upon this reality. The General Council's failure stemmed from its refusal to address the political responsibilities of the strike, leading to disaster. Shortcomings of the Labour Party's ballot box approach. Suggesting the ballot box as an alternative to direct action dodges the political realities revealed during the strike. The capitalist class has countermeasures in place, such as blocking socialist legislation and suppressing revolutionary propaganda. The vote is one tool, not a substitute for broader class struggle. Need for a real General Council. The General Council's failures highlight the necessity of unifying all trade unions under disciplined, working-class political leadership. Such a council must be governed by the principles of working-class politics, not the anti-worker ideologies of current leaders. Role of the Communist Party. The Communist Party is the only entity that maintained consistent and effective action before, during, and after the strike. Building the Communist Party is essential for creating disciplined leadership aligned with working-class politics. Current class struggle, the post-strike landscape. Economic weakness versus political strength of the ruling class. The ruling class emerged politically stronger but economically weaker, with worsening social and economic conditions threatening its foundations. The strike acted as an accelerator of class war, intensifying demands for wage reductions and longer working hours. Preparations by the ruling class. The ruling class is actively fortifying itself by restricting union rights, suppressing revolutionary propaganda, blocking labor advances through legal and structural changes. The slogans of "Never Again" from labor leaders demonstrate a refusal to learn from the strike. The challenge of leadership morale of the working class. Despite leadership betrayal, worker morale remains intact, with growing resentment toward the collapse of their leaders. However, the absence of strong revolutionary leadership within the ranks hampers immediate progress. The path to change. The key issue is leadership, not structure. Changing leadership is a gradual process intertwined with the growth of a disciplined Communist Party. Workers need to learn through their own experiences the vital role of revolutionary politics in class struggle. Transition from labourism to communism. Many workers are moving from labourist ideologies to communist principles as they shed the constraints of capitalist politics. These workers must be organized within labor structures to fight for immediate working class demands while transitioning toward communist politics. The role of the minority movement. The minority movement works as a fraction within trade unions, advocating for working class demands and communist principles. Expanding this movement involves electing committed leaders who will implement radical resolutions rather than leaving them to conservative control. The cooperative movement during the strike. Disarray and sabotage. The cooperative movement lacked clear direction during the general strike, with leaders split between supporting the workers, staying neutral, or sabotaging the strike outright. This disorganization highlighted the need for a cohesive and organized approach within the cooperatives. Need for organization. To be effective in future struggles, the cooperative movement must adopt structured leadership and align with working-class interests, similar to the minority movement within trade unions. Organizing opposition in the Labour Party. Lack of a true left wing. The so-called left wing in the Labour Party and on the General Council was disorganized and ineffective, easily overpowered by the organized right wing. The absence of cohesion rendered the left wing little more than scattered individuals without the power to challenge the leadership. Framework for a left wing. Opposition within the Labour Party must form a united front, organized as a fraction with its own leadership, focusing on specific working-class objectives. This approach would not create a new party but strengthen the Labour Party by removing anti-working-class leadership. Communists' role in supporting opposition. Communists support efforts by sincere workers to organize opposition within labor ranks, as this process will demonstrate the necessity of a strong Communist Party to lead the working class. Collaboration with honest efforts to fight for workers' rights aligns with Communist goals of uniting social forces for revolutionary purposes. The role of the Communist Party, essential leadership for victory. A victory for the working class over the capitalist class is unthinkable without the leadership of a powerful Communist Party. The party's role is to unite workers' organizations around revolutionary issues and provide clear political direction. Historical context and affirmation. The general strike of 1926 confirmed the Communist Party's prior analysis that the Labour Party's unpreparedness for class conflict would result in failure. This strike marked a pivotal moment in Britain's working-class history, underscoring the inescapable challenge of class power. The general strike as a political landmark, class struggle and social evolution. The general strike demonstrated the unavoidable conflict between the growth of the working class and the decline of capitalism. It was a significant event in the evolution of social forces fighting for dominance. The path forward, the war between classes, will be long or short depending on how well the working class organizes and adopts revolutionary leadership. Ultimately, victory belongs to the workers, but it requires disciplined organization and the leadership of the Communist Party.